There is no horizon, only a narrow cone of visibility, defined by the faint glow of cockpit instruments and the weak scatter of external light against the canopy. Beyond that, nothing. The surface below is indistinguishable from the sky above, a continuous field of darkness, unbroken, without reference. The aircraft is already in flight, a single engine silhouette moving steadily across the night sky over the Bass Strait. No turbulence, no abrupt motion, only the constant, mechanical rhythm of controlled flight. Engine tone stable, airspeed steady, altitude maintained. Inside the cockpit, the instruments carry the full burden of orientation. Airspeed indicator, steady, altimeter, holding, heading, consistent. There is no external confirmation, no coastline, no visible horizon, only the assumption that the instruments are correct. At 19:06 local time, a transmission begins. Not urgent, not alarmed, measured, a young pilot's voice, controlled but searching. Frederick Valentich establishes contact with Melbourne Flight Service. His aircraft is en route from Moorabbin to King Island. The flight plan is routine. The airspace is not congested. There are no known traffic conflicts. But something has entered his field of awareness. He reports an aircraft, unidentified, positioned above him. The controller responds with procedural clarity. There is no known traffic in the area at his altitude, no scheduled aircraft, no military activity, no radar confirmation. The answer is definitive. There should be nothing there. A pause follows, short, not empty, but filled with a low-frequency hum of the engine and the quiet friction of air over the fuselage. Inside the cockpit, nothing changes mechanically. The aircraft continues forward, stable, controlled. Then the pilot speaks again. The object remains. He describes it not as a fixed point of light, but as something moving. It is not maintaining a steady position. It is not following a conventional flight path. It appears to be orbiting, passing above, then to the side. There is no acceleration pattern consistent with known aircraft behavior. No navigation lights that can be clearly identified. The controller repeats the information. No known traffic. The exchange remains calm. No escalation in tone. No urgency injected into the communication. Only a widening gap between what is expected and what is being observed. The aircraft continues its course. Altitude remains approximately 4,500 feet. The engine tone, transmitted faintly through the open microphone, is unchanged. Steady combustion, no interruption, no fluctuation. Then, a subtle shift. The pilot begins to question his own interpretation. He describes the object again, this time with more specificity. It appears elongated, metallic. It reflects light, but not consistently. The surface seems irregular, not defined by standard aviation lighting. Still, there is no corroboration, no radar return, no secondary report, no visual confirmation from ground or other aircraft. Only a single observer, isolated over open water. The darkness outside the cockpit provides no scale. Distance cannot be judged. Speed cannot be accurately perceived. Without a horizon, without reference points, movement becomes ambiguous. Relative motion can be misinterpreted. A distant object may appear close. A stationary light may seem to drift. Inside the cockpit, the instruments remain unchanged. They do not confirm the presence of another aircraft. They do not deny it. They simply continue to report altitude, heading, airspeed, the fundamentals of control flight. The pilot initiates a change in position. He reports that the object is approaching, not rapidly, not aggressively, but deliberately. The controller asks for clarification. The response is fragmented, not incoherent, but interrupted by observation. The pilot's attention is divided between communication and visual tracking. Each sentence is constructed while monitoring something outside the aircraft. He reports that the object has passed above him again. Then again, the motion is not linear. It is not consistent with a crossing trajectory or overtaking maneuver. It suggests circling behavior, observation rather than transit. The cockpit remains stable, but the pilot's frame of reference begins to narrow. The external world is reduced to a single variable, the presence of this object. Everything else fades into procedural background. Navigation becomes secondary. Orientation becomes assumed rather than verified. The controller continues to request information. Altitude, position, heading. Each answer is given, but without expansion, without confirmation beyond the instrument readings. There is no indication that the aircraft itself is malfunctioning. No alarm, no warning system activation. But then, a change, subtle at first. The pilot reports engine roughness. Not failure, not silence, but irregularity. A deviation from the steady tone that had remained constant since the beginning of the transmission. The controller acknowledges, requests clarification. The response is delayed. In the background, the engine sound, previously consistent, begins to fluctuate. Slight variations in pitch. Minor interruptions in combustion rhythm. Not catastrophic, but noticeable. The pilot continues. The object is still present, still above, still moving. There is no attempt to disengage from the observation. No clear maneuver to exit the area. The aircraft remains within the same operational envelope. Altitude roughly maintained. Heading not significantly altered. But orientation is now uncertain. The absence of a horizon becomes critical. Without visual reference, the body cannot distinguish between level flight and gradual bank. A slow roll may go unnoticed. A descent may feel like level motion. The instruments are the only reliable source. But attention is divided. Outside, the object moves again. The pilot describes it as hovering, then accelerating, then returning. The descriptions do not align with known flight characteristics, but they are delivered without exaggeration. Only observation. The controller, bound by procedure, repeats. No known traffic. The implication is clear. Whatever is being observed is not recognized within the control system. The pilot transmits again. The words are shorter now, more fragmented. The cognitive load is increasing. Monitoring instruments, tracking the object, managing the aircraft, communicating. Each task competes for attention. Then, the final transmission. No clear sentence. No structured report. Only a brief statement. It's not an aircraft. Followed by silence. Then a sound. A metallic, irregular scraping. Not continuous. Not mechanical in a predictable sense. It lasts only a moment. Then, nothing. No engine noise. No carrier signal modulation. No follow-up transmission. The frequency remains open, but empty. The aircraft does not re-establish contact. No distress call is issued. No emergency code transmitted. No descent is reported. No impact is heard. Only absence. The sky over the Bass Strait remains unchanged. Dark, featureless, indifferent. The last known position holds no visible marker. No debris. No light. No trace. Only coordinates. And a voice, recorded in fragments, describing something that could not be verified. The instruments, wherever they came to rest, continued to function until they no longer could, but their final readings were never recovered. The flight was not unusual. It was scheduled within the margins of routine general aviation, short distance, manageable conditions, a familiar aircraft, and a pilot operating within the lower range of private flying experience. There was no indication, at departure that the sequence would deviate from expectation. The date was October 21st, 1978. Late evening. At Moorabbin Airport, south of Melbourne, activity was diminishing. The rhythm of the day had slowed. Aircraft movements were fewer, radio traffic less dense. The transition from daylight to night operations was complete, and with it came a different set of demands: less visual reference, greater reliance on instruments, increased procedural discipline. Frederick Valentich arrived with a clear intention. The filed flight plan indicated a route from Moorabbin to King Island, a distance of approximately 235 kilometers across the Bass Strait. The duration, estimated at just over an hour. The aircraft, a light, single-engine platform well within the capability range for such a journey. There were no flags within the documentation, no emergency declarations, no deviation requests. The purpose of the flight, however, would later become a point of discussion. Officially, it was presented as a routine trip. Unofficially, accounts varied. Some suggested the intention to collect passengers. Others indicated a personal objective not fully detailed in the flight plan. None of these possibilities, however, altered the operational parameters of the flight itself. The aircraft assigned was a Cessna 182L Skylane, a stable, high-wing monoplane, widely used in general aviation for training, private transport, and light utility roles. Its design emphasized predictability and control. It was not complex, but it required disciplined handling, especially under night conditions where visual cues were limited. The aircraft had no known mechanical issues prior to departure. Fuel levels were sufficient for the planned route. Instrumentation was standard for the era, analog, reliable when interpreted correctly, but entirely dependent on pilot input and attention. Frederick Valentich himself was not an inexperienced individual, but he was not advanced. At 20 years old, he held a private pilot license. His total flight experience was approximately 150 hours, enough to operate independently, not enough to eliminate uncertainty under stress or ambiguity. His training record was mixed. There were documented instances of difficulty in navigation exercises, occasional challenges in maintaining orientation under instrument-only conditions. These were not disqualifying, but they indicated a developing skill set rather than a fully matured one. He did not hold an instrument rating. This detail was significant. Without certification for Instrument Flight Rules, IFR, he was legally and operationally limited to Visual Flight Rules, VFR. This meant that the flight depended on maintaining visual reference with the external environment, horizon, terrain, or other identifiable features. Over land, this requirement could often be met even at night. Over open water, it could not. The Bass Strait presents a specific challenge. During daylight, it offers minimal visual reference beyond the distant coastline. At night, it becomes effectively featureless. The separation between sea and sky disappears. Without moonlight or atmospheric contrast, the environment reduces to a uniform darkness. Pilots describe this condition as a visual void. There is no horizon, no depth perception, no scale, only the aircraft, its instruments, and whatever internal sense of balance the pilot can maintain. In such conditions, the human vestibular system, responsible for spatial orientation, can become unreliable. Subtle movements may go undetected. A gradual bank may feel level. A descent may not register until instruments are consulted. This is why instrument training exists. It teaches pilots to trust the instruments over physical sensation. Frederick Valentich did not have this training. His navigation for the flight relied on standard VFR techniques, heading, time estimation, and visual confirmation where possible. Over land, this approach can be effective. Over water at night, it becomes increasingly dependent on precision and discipline. Air traffic control coverage in the region was present but limited. Melbourne Flight Service provided communication and advisory support. Radar coverage, however, was not continuous at low altitudes over the Bass Strait. Aircraft flying below certain thresholds would not appear consistently on radar screens. This created a gap. Pilots operating in that space were effectively alone, with communication as their only link to the ground. Search and rescue infrastructure, while functional, was constrained by geography. The Bass Strait is wide, with unpredictable conditions. If an aircraft were to go down, the probability of immediate location was low, especially at night, and especially without an emergency signal. At the time of Valentich's departure, none of these factors were abnormal. They were known, accepted, managed through procedure and training. The weather on that evening was reported as clear. No storms, no significant turbulence. Winds were present but not extreme. On paper, the conditions were suitable for VFR flight, but clear does not mean visible. Clarity in meteorological terms refers to the absence of cloud and precipitation. It does not account for the absence of visual reference over dark water. This distinction is critical. The aircraft departed Moorabbin at approximately 1819 local time. Climb out was normal. Initial heading established. Communication with air traffic services was routine. There were no indications of deviation in the early stages of the flight. The aircraft progressed southeast, moving away from the coastline and into open water. As distance from land increased, visual references diminished. Lights from the mainland faded. The horizon, if it had been visible at all, disappeared. What remained was an isolated aircraft operating in a controlled but increasingly abstract environment. Inside the cockpit, the transition would have been subtle. No sudden shift, no clear boundary, only a gradual reduction in external cues. The reliance on instruments would have increased incrementally. Each heading adjustment, each altitude check, each fuel calculation performed without external confirmation. This is the nature of night VFR over water. It does not announce its difficulty. It reveals it slowly. At some point during the flight, the aircraft crossed a threshold, not geographical, but perceptual. Beyond it, orientation could no longer be supported by vision, only by interpretation, only by discipline, and only by trust in systems that provide information without context. By the time Frederick Valentich initiated contact regarding the unidentified aircraft, he was already within this environment, already isolated, already operating in conditions where perception could not be easily verified. The transmission did not begin the problem. It revealed it. The event does not begin with a single failure. It emerges from the interaction of multiple systems, mechanical, human, environmental, each operating within its limits. None of them, in isolation, is sufficient to produce an outcome. Together, they create a condition in which uncertainty can develop, persist, and eventually dominate. To understand the disappearance, each component must be examined separately. A aircraft, Cessna 182 LSKE lane. The aircraft was not complex. A Cessna 182L Skylane is a high-wing, single-engine piston aircraft designed for stability and reliability. Its structure emphasizes predictable handling. Its systems are mechanical, direct, and, when functioning normally, transparent to the pilot. Power is provided by a single engine mounted at the nose. Propeller-driven, air-cooled, simple in design, but sensitive to fuel-air mixture, temperature, and pilot input. The cockpit is analog, no automation, no flight management system, no digital stabilization. Every parameter, altitude, speed, heading, is read from physical instruments and interpreted manually. At night, these instruments become the primary interface between pilot and environment. The altimeter provides vertical position. The airspeed indicator confirms aerodynamic performance. The heading indicator offers directional reference, but must be periodically corrected using the magnetic compass. The attitude indicator, if installed and functioning, provides artificial horizon information, but it is not infallible. It relies on gyroscopic stability, which can degrade over time or under certain conditions. The aircraft's lighting system is external. Navigation lights define position. Landing lights illuminate forward space, but over open water at altitude, they reveal nothing beyond a narrow beam into darkness. There is no onboard radar, no collision avoidance system, no independent verification of other aircraft. The pilot sees what the environment allows, and nothing more. Fuel capacity is sufficient for the planned route, but fuel systems in light aircraft require active management. Mixture settings must be adjusted. Fuel tanks may need to be switched. Improper handling can lead to engine irregularities, not immediate failure, but fluctuations. The aircraft, in technical terms, was capable of completing the flight. There is no evidence of structural limitation, no inherent design flaw relevant to the conditions. But capability is not immunity. It depends on interpretation. B. Pilot, Frederick Valentich. The pilot represents the central point of convergence. All data flows through him. All decisions originate there. Frederick Valentich was 20 years old, licensed, active, but still developing. Approximately 150 hours of total flight time places a pilot beyond initial training, but not yet into deep experience. It is a phase where confidence can increase faster than exposure to complexity. His training history included areas of concern. Navigation exercises had presented difficulty. Maintaining orientation under limited visibility conditions had been inconsistent. These are not uncommon issues at this stage of development, but they are relevant. He did not hold an instrument rating. This is not a minor certification difference. It defines how a pilot is trained to respond when visual references are lost. Without instrument training, a pilot may still read instruments, but interpretation under stress becomes less reliable. Trust becomes conditional. The body begins to compete with the instruments. Inner ear sensations, acceleration, tilt, may conflict with what the gauges indicate. Without training, the instinct is often to trust sensation. This is where disorientation begins. Psychological context also matters. There were reports, documented but not conclusively tied to the event, of a strong interest in unidentified aerial phenomena. This detail must be handled carefully. It does not imply predisposition to misinterpretation, but it introduces a variable: expectation. If a pilot anticipates a possibility of encountering something unusual, the threshold for identifying ambiguity as significance may lower. This does not create an event, but it can shape perception within one. During the recorded transmissions, Valentich's voice remains controlled. There is no panic, no escalation into distress. This suggests that, at least initially, he believed he was observing and reporting, not reacting to immediate danger. That distinction is important. It indicates a cognitive framing of the situation as informational rather than critical, at least in the early phase. See environment, night over water. The environment is not passive. It actively removes information. The Bass Strait at night is not visually empty. It is perceptually deceptive. Without a visible horizon, the human brain loses its primary orientation reference. Balance becomes internal, and internal systems are not designed for sustained accuracy in flight. There are known phenomena associated with this condition. The black hole effect. A pilot flying over a dark surface with minimal ground lighting may perceive altitude incorrectly. The absence of visual cues creates the illusion of being higher than actual, leading to gradual descent. Autokinesis. A stationary light, viewed against a dark background, may appear to move. Small involuntary eye movements create the perception of motion where none exists. False horizon, cloud layers, distant lights, or even reflection can be interpreted as horizon lines, leading to incorrect aircraft attitude. These are not rare occurrences. They are documented, repeatable, and understood within aviation training. But understanding them requires exposure, training, experience. The weather that night was reported as clear, but clarity, in this context, means absence of obstruction, not presence of reference. The sky was dark. The sea was dark. There was minimal moonlight. No significant cloud structure to define layers. The aircraft was effectively suspended within a void. In such conditions, depth perception collapses. Distance becomes speculative. Relative motion becomes ambiguous. An object that appears to circle may be stationary. An object that appears above may be at the same altitude. Or below, without reference. Position cannot be confirmed visually, only inferred. D. Systems, communication, radar, navigation. The final layer is the operational system surrounding the flight. Air traffic control was present, but limited. Melbourne Flight Service provided communication. Advisory, not control. There was no continuous radar tracking of the aircraft at its operating altitude. This is not a failure. It is a limitation of coverage. Low-altitude radar over open water, especially in that era, was incomplete. This meant that Valentich's aircraft existed outside continuous surveillance. His position was known only through reported estimates. His altitude, self-reported. His heading, declared. There was no independent confirmation. Communication was the only link. A single radio channel, voice transmission, subject to interruption, misinterpretation, and delay. There was no data link, no secondary verification. Navigation relied on dead reckoning, heading and time, possibly supported by radio navigation aids, depending on equipment and usage, but over water. With increasing distance from land-based stations, signal reliability can degrade. The system, as a whole, functioned as designed. It provided structure, but it did not eliminate isolation. When the unidentified object was reported, the system responded correctly. The controller checked for known traffic. There was none. The response reflected available data. No confirmation. No denial beyond system limits. This created a gap between observation and validation. That gap was never closed. Convergence. Individually, each element remained within acceptable boundaries. A capable aircraft, a licensed pilot, clear weather, functional communication, limited but normal system coverage. Together, they create a scenario where visual reference is absent, instrument reliance is required, training is incomplete, external validation is unavailable. Within this space, ambiguity is not resolved. It accumulates, and once established, it begins to influence interpretation, attention, and decision-making. By the time the unidentified object becomes central to the pilot's awareness, the underlying conditions already in place. The system has not failed, but it has reached the edge of what it can support. The timeline compresses, not in duration, but in clarity. From this point forward, everything that is known is derived from a single source, voice transmissions, recorded in real time, without visual confirmation, without independent verification. The sequence must be reconstructed from fragments, each statement carrying both information and uncertainty. At approximately 1906, the aircraft is established at 4,500 feet, heading toward King Island. The engine is operating normally. The environment outside remains unchanged, dark, without horizon, without reference. The first indication of deviation is not mechanical. It is observational. Valentich reports an aircraft above him. The phrasing is controlled. There is no urgency in tone. He does not declare an emergency. He requests information. Melbourne Flight Service responds within procedure. There is no known traffic at his altitude. No aircraft are being cleared into that sector. No radar return corresponds to his report. The airspace, as far as the system can confirm, is empty. The exchange could have ended there, but it does not. A short interval passes. The aircraft continues forward. Then Valentich transmits again. The object remains. It is not receding. It is not passing through. It is staying. He describes its position, above, then to the side. The motion is not linear. It is not consistent with an aircraft crossing his path, overtaking him. Instead, it suggests relative movement that cannot be easily categorized. From the cockpit, this distinction is critical. Without external reference, relative motion becomes difficult to interpret. If two objects move in the same general direction, slight variations in speed or heading can create the illusion of circling. If one object is stationary relative to the ground, and the observer is moving, that object may appear to shift position. Distance becomes a variable that cannot be measured visually. Valentich continues to observe. He describes the object as elongated, its surface reflective. There are lights, but not arranged in a configuration he recognizes. This is not presented as speculation. It is presented as description. Melbourne Flight Service repeats its position. No known aircraft. The implication remained procedural, not interpretive. The system cannot validate the observation. The aircraft maintains altitude. There is no report of climb or descent. No indication of evasive maneuvering. The pilot does not declare avoidance. Instead, he continues to track. This introduces a subtle shift. Attention, previously distributed across navigation, engine monitoring, and communication, begins to concentrate on a single external variable, the object. Each transmission becomes shorter, more focused. The controller requests clarification. Valentich responds, but with increasing fragmentation, not confusion, but divided processing. At this stage, there is no confirmed mechanical issue. The engine tone, audible in the background of the transmission, remains steady. The aircraft is still under control. Then the reported motion changes. Valentich states that the object is orbiting above him, not passing, not overtaking, circling. This description introduces a complex interpretive problem. True orbiting behavior would require controlled, circular flight path relative to the observer. But without a horizon, without fixed reference, a constant bearing object can appear to move in a circular pattern as the observer changes heading, even slightly. A small, unnoticed bank, a gradual turn. The pilot may not perceive it, but the geometry changes. The object's apparent motion becomes dynamic. The pilot interprets, reports, attempt to reconcile observation with expectation. Melbourne Flight Service, constrained by available data, cannot assist beyond confirmation of absence. No traffic, no radar, no additional information. The aircraft continues forward, or appears to. At some point within the sequence, Valentich reports engine roughness. The change is subtle. There is no declaration of failure, only irregularity. The steady tone heard earlier begins to fluctuate. Variations in pitch, minor interruptions. In a piston engine, this can result from several factors. Fuel mixture imbalance, carburetor icing, airflow disruption, or pilot input. None of these immediately imply loss of power, but they introduce instability. The controller acknowledges the report, requests further detail. The response is delayed. Attention remains external. The object is still present. Still above. Still moving. Valentich describes it again. This time, the description becomes less structured. The words are selected quickly, without elaboration. He states that it is not an aircraft. This is not a conclusion. It is an expression of uncertainty, an attempt to categorize something that does not align with known patterns. From an analytical standpoint, this moment is critical. It marks the transition from observation to interpretation. The pilot is no longer reporting what is seen. He is attempting to define it. At the same time, the aircraft's internal state is changing. The engine continues to run, but irregularly. There is no confirmation of altitude stability, no updated heading, no positional fix. The communication loop begins to narrow. Controller prompts, pilot responses, increasingly brief. Then, a pause, longer than previous gaps. The frequency remains open. Ambient engine noise is present, but inconsistent. A low, intermittent modulation. Not a clear failure, but not stable. Then the final transmission. No structured sentence. No procedural content. Only a brief statement. It's not an aircraft. The words are followed immediately by a sound. Metallic, irregular, not rhythmic, not continuous. It lasts for a few seconds. Then it stops. The carrier signal continues momentarily, then disappears. There is no further transmission, no distress call, no emergency code, no indication of impact, no secondary signal. The aircraft does not reappear on any system. No radar contact, no visual confirmation, no debris reported. The last known position remains approximate, derived from timing, from heading, from estimated ground speed. The area below is open water, dark, unmarked. The sequence ends without resolution. There is no confirmed moment of loss of control, no recorded descent, no impact signature, only a transition from communication to silence, from presence to absence. The aircraft, its pilot, and whatever was observed in those final minutes leave no further trace within the system. What remains is the recording, a series of statements, technically clear, contextually incomplete, and a final sound that does not correspond to a known, documented mechanical event with certainty. The turning point is not a single moment. It is a convergence, observation, interpretation, environmental limitation, and potential mechanical irregularity aligning within a narrow window of time. After that, there is nothing further to reconstruct. The absence is immediate. There is no gradual loss of contact, no intermittent signal, no partial recovery of communication. The transmission ends, and with it, the aircraft disappears from all known systems. What follows is not a continuation of the event, but an attempt to define its boundaries. Within minutes of the final transmission, Melbourne Flight Service initiates standard uncertainty procedures. At first, the classification is procedural. An aircraft has failed to report. Communication has ceased. But there is no confirmed emergency, no distress call, no declared malfunction beyond the brief mention of engine roughness. The distinction matters. Search and rescue protocols escalate in stages. Initial uncertainty must be resolved before full emergency deployment begins. Attempts are made to re-establish contact. Repeated calls on the assigned frequency. No response. Other aircraft in the region are queried. No visual confirmation. No additional reports of unusual activity. The time window begins to expand. Each minute without contact increases the operational concern. The classification shifts from uncertainty to alert, then to distress. Search operations are initiated. The challenge is immediate. There is no fixed position, only an estimated area derived from last reported altitude, heading time elapsed since last confirmed transmission. This creates a search zone, not a point. A wide, open expanse of water. The Bass Strait does not offer containment. Currents move. Winds shift. If an aircraft has entered the water, drift begins immediately. Surface debris disperses. Visibility, even in daylight, is limited. At night, it is effectively non-existent. Aircraft are deployed. Search patterns are established. Grid-based sweeps across the estimated area. Marine units are notified. Coordination expands across agencies. The operation continues into the following day. Daylight improves visibility, but not certainty. The ocean surface reveals no immediate evidence. No oil slick. No floating debris. No life raft. No signal beacon. The aircraft carried no advanced locator transmitter as required in later decades. Emergency locator transmitters, ELT, of the era were not always reliable, and activation depended on impact conditions. No signal is detected. The search continues. Hours become days. The area is expanded. Additional passes are conducted. Still, nothing. The absence begins to define the event as much as the disappearance itself. Without physical evidence, the investigation cannot proceed through standard reconstruction. There is no wreckage to examine, no impact site to analyze, no mechanical components to test. The inquiry shifts to what remains available: the recorded transmissions, flight documentation, pilot history, environmental data, air traffic records. Each is examined methodically. The transmissions are transcribed, analyzed for tone, structure, and content. There is no indication of panic, no abrupt shift into distress language. The pilot remains controlled throughout. This complicates interpretation. A sudden emergency often produces recognizable patterns: elevated voice, incomplete sentences, rapid escalation. These are absent. Instead, the communication reflects observation and interpretation under increasing uncertainty. The report of an unidentified aircraft becomes central. Investigators examine all known traffic: commercial flights, private aircraft, military operations. None match the reported position, altitude, or behavior. Radar data is reviewed. Coverage is limited. No confirmed return corresponding to Valentich's report is identified. The system cannot confirm the presence of another aircraft, but it also cannot definitively exclude the possibility of something beyond its detection range. This distinction remains unresolved. Attention turns to the aircraft itself. Maintenance records show no critical issues. Fuel capacity was adequate. There is no evidence of pre-existing mechanical failure. The reported engine roughness is considered. Possible explanations include fuel mixture imbalance, carburetor icing, pilot-induced mismanagement. Each is plausible. None can be confirmed. Without wreckage, mechanical analysis remains theoretical. Human factors become a primary focus. The pilot's experience level, his training limitations, his exposure to night flying over water. Investigators consider spatial disorientation, a known risk under the exact conditions present during the flight. The sequence aligns with a possible scenario: loss of external visual reference, increased reliance on internal perception, gradual deviation in aircraft attitude, unrecognized bank or descent, attempt to reconcile conflicting sensory input, simultaneous external distraction, the reported object, cognitive load increases, instrument cross-checking may degrade, engine irregularity, whether real or perceived, adds another layer of complexity. This chain does not require catastrophic failure, only incremental deviation. Over time, it can lead to loss of control, but this remains a hypothesis, one of several. The reported object introduces an additional variable. Investigators treat it cautiously. It is documented. It cannot be ignored, but it cannot be verified. Alternative explanations are considered. Misidentified celestial object planetary light distortion reflection within the cockpit canopy. Other aircraft outside controlled reporting autokinesis is examined. A stationary light appearing to move due to eye motion. Under conditions of isolation and darkness, this effect can become pronounced. Combined with slight aircraft movement, it can produce the illusion of complex motion patterns. The description of orbiting behavior may align with such an effect, but again, it cannot be confirmed. Public attention begins to grow. The lack of resolution creates space for speculation. Media coverage expands. The narrative shifts from incident to mystery. The reported unidentified object becomes a focal point. Interpretations extend beyond aviation. Some suggest external interference. Others propose intentional disappearance. These perspectives are not supported by evidence, but they persist. The investigation remains grounded. Its conclusions reflect limitation, not certainty. The official finding is classified as cause unknown. Contributing factors are outlined, possibilities acknowledged, but no definitive chain is established. The absence of wreckage prevents closure. The absence of data prevents confirmation. Families are left without physical resolution. No sight, no recovery, only a last known position. The search is eventually scaled down, then concluded. The aircraft is not found. Frederick Valentich is not recovered. The case remains open in classification, but inactive in operation. Its impact extends beyond the immediate loss. It enters the broader context of aviation incidents defined by uncertainty. Events where systems functioned, procedures were followed, and yet the outcome could not be fully reconstructed. The disappearance becomes part of training discussions, not as a sole case, but as a scenario, an illustration of how quickly clarity can erode, and how difficult it becomes to recover once it does. Yes,